Hey friends, welcome back to our last video in this series, techniques that you absolutely have to know when beginning to paint with watercolor. My name's Emma Fave, and today we're going to be doing some really fun effects that you can use when painting with watercolor. It is so much fun, so let's just dive in. But before we do, please hit that subscribe button. Make sure you turn on that notification bell so you're notified of every new video I come out with. And give this video a like if you like it, because that's just a really nice thing to do. Okay, let's jump in to our last video on watercolor techniques for the week. Okay friends, we are on our last video of techniques you need to know in order to start with watercolor, and today is more fun techniques that I really enjoy. They're kind of more effects that you can do with watercolor. So to start, let's just go over what we went through last time. Our first video, we learned about single color gradients and dual color gradients and blending, which are both very important techniques. And then our last video, we did wet on wet, which is a lot of fun, and wet on dry to create depth and distance in your videos. And like I said, today we're gonna be doing some fun techniques. Okay, so our first one that you may remember from like art class in elementary school, if you did this, is dropping salt. The really, really fun texture you can get from dropping salt into your paint. So I'm gonna grab some Ultramarine here, blue, and I'm just gonna lay it down. And remember how I said water repels pigment? Well, so does salt, and it gives it a really cool effect. So I would like to use this in a fun sky or like snow effect. Just a lot of fun. So here I have a wet surface with some blue, and I have this little cup of salt, just table salt. Table salt and like more coarse salt will give you different outcomes. I kind of like the finer salt, like table salt, but you can try both and see what happens. So you're just gonna drop just a little bit. You really don't need to overdo it on your paper like that. Okay, and you're gonna leave it to completely dry. So while we're waiting for that to dry, before I can show you the effect, I'm going to move on to my next really fun technique, which is dropping water, which I already kind of showed you with our wet on wet when I dropped wet water into our background. So again, let's just use the blue. I'm just going to kind of refresh your memory with that. And like I said, water repels pigment. So dropping water is going to push pigment away and make it kind of have these really fun blooms. Now, in some instances, people don't like blooms, but when they're done intentionally, they can be a lot of fun. So you can tap with clean water like we did that one time, or you can just take your brush with some clean water and just tap like that, and it will repel the pigment. Now, if you wait for your paper to dry slightly, it changes. You'll get less of an effect if your paper is really, really wet like that. I'm going to let this one just dry so it's damp, not really, really wet. And I'm going to show you it can be a bit more intense. So let me just lay down my color. I'm going to let it dry just a bit quickly. Okay, so it's a bit more on the damp side. And I'm just going to take, see that effect you get? So when it's a bit more on the damp side, you get these even more intense effects. So that's more wet on wet, like a lot of water on the surface, and then you're dropping more water. But once it's already start to dry, you can get these really, really cool effects. Now, this also tends to happen sometimes by accident when maybe you're painting a petal of a flower and it starts to dry a bit, and you paint another petal right beside it, and the first petal has already started to dry, and that new petal that you just put down is a little bit more wet than the first. So then you get this thing called a bloom, which is what this is. Some people don't like that, but it's also really cool to use as a technique to get this kind of effect. So that's more the wet on wet dropping water, and this is more the dropping water on a damp surface. So not completely dry, just a little damp. So play around with that. to see what kind of techniques you can get or effects you can get. And then our next fun effect is dry brush, which I actually really enjoy as well. Now, dry brush is when your brush is more on the dry side, not completely dry, but it's just damp. There's not a lot of pigment. And then you pick up some color. This is actually not that wet. It might need to be a bit more wet. And you just bring your brush on its side and you drag it across. And you get this really fun texture. Now, one place I really like to use this is mountains. So I'm going to dry my brush off. I'm going to pick up some blue so there's not a lot of water on my brush. And I'll just create these mountains with a dry brush. Okay, let's maybe make it a little darker. I just got to add more paint here. Wash off my brush, dry it so it's pretty dry, and you're just picking up a bit of that pigment. There, it's darker. And it almost looks like there's snow-covered mountains. See that? And then you can add a little bit more, you know, darkness to one side. A little bit more definition. But I really love using dry brush for mountains or even like a field of grass. So let me wash off my brush, dry it again. Pick up some of that green. So it just doesn't touch the whole surface of the paper. And you're going to get more of a dry brush effect with more textured paper. So if you have really smooth paper, it might not come out as textured as this. But if you have toothier paper where there's a lot more texture and you can feel it's kind of bumpy, you're more likely to get a dry brush effect. And then if you don't want a dry brush and it to be a little bit more solid, you just add a little bit more water on your brush, a little bit more color. And you can smooth it out to get those solid lines. But that's a lot of fun to use for texture in landscapes, okay? And then our last fun technique, and is also really great for fixing mistakes, is called lifting or blotting. So we actually did this with our leaf back here where I showed you if you blend too hard, you actually end up lifting the paint, which is not what you want when you're trying to blend. But if you want to say, here, let's grab a different color here. Make something lighter, like say I'm making a ball here and I forgot to add a highlight. And you always want to work light to dark with watercolor because you can't really lighten it after. But the one exception to that rule is wash off your brush while it's still wet, dry it on your paper towel, and lift the color with your brush. And you can reveal that highlight. Okay, so lifting helps when you want to create lighter areas on a wet surface. Or one other way that works is say you make a mark and you go, oh, I did not want to do that. I didn't want to do that color. I've ruined my whole painting. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Take your paper towel and you're going to lift it like that. Let's see if this actually works with this paper. Okay. You lift up a bunch of that color, take some clean water and start to kind of gently scrub a bit. And you lift and you can get most of it gone and say, I didn't want that color. I wanted blue and I made that mistake. Most times you can paint all right over it and you wouldn't even tell too much. That color was not the best example. Some colors are staining colors where they are harder to lift. Okay, so some colors will not come up as easily. My paper towel is also very wet. So let's try to do it again with a different color. Okay, so let's try green. And I do a leaf and I'm like, ooh, that does not look good. Make sure it's still wet, work fast, lift. Okay. Gently kind of scrub with clean water, lift, again, a little bit more clean water, lift, and then you can most likely paint over top of it and no one, whatever color you use, no one would know, okay? So that's where you can lift to fix a mistake. This is where you can lift if you've, you know, made too dark of a value and you wanted that highlight. So I would do that, you know, sometimes with my leaves and stuff. If it's too dark, if I went too dark to begin with, wash off my brush, dry it on my paper towel, then lift some of that pigment off like that, and you make it lighter. And then the last part of the lifting kind of technique is lifting more with paper towel, which is also called blotting. Now this is really great if you want to create some clouds. So let's just do like a blue sky. So make sure it's wet. And then you're going to take your paper towel. I just kind of like to wrap it around my finger to create kind of like a circle. And then I will blot. And it lifts the color right off. Okay, you'll still have a little bit of that blue underneath, but like look at the beautiful cloud. Okay, so just keep in mind, lifting only really works if the paper is still wet. Once it's dry, you cannot lift. The exception for that is some colors will lift easier if you reactivate it with water. There is a fun kind of effect called bokeh, which I've done before, where you, if you've seen it's in photography, where you get those lights that are out of focus. So you get these kind of out of focus circles along, and I've done a painting or two trying to recreate that effect with watercolor. And to do that, you would paint a surface, let it dry, and then you would take a wet, clean brush, and let's try and do it here. You would kind of scrub a circle with your brush in clean water, and you would blot, and it would lift some color. Now, like I said, it works with some colors and some papers and not others. Some are a bit more staining, so you're not going to lift as much, but a lot actually do lift pretty well. Sometimes I find on different papers it doesn't work as well either. But I use this technique if I'm doing a bokeh, just clean water and gently scrubbing in a circular motion to try and lift that color off, and it usually works. Okay, so there are more fun techniques that you can do with watercolor that you just need to know, because you can just create so many cool effects in your paintings. And then lastly, this is dry now. Let's just sweep off the salt, and you get this really cool effect that almost kind of looks like snow or stars. So much fun. So there you go. There is our last video on our techniques that you need to know. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below which video is your favorite or which technique is your favorite. And let me know which technique is the most difficult for you to kind of grasp as a beginner. And if there's anything else you'd like me to kind of clarify with that. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed this week of beginner techniques for watercolor. I hope it was very informative. I hope you feel a little bit more confident. Again, if you don't, it takes time. It just does. And time and practice is what's going to make you more confident and feel better about painting, but don't give up if you enjoy it, because I promise it gets a lot more fun. So stick with me on this channel. Again, don't forget to subscribe, because I come out with new videos every week, and I will see you next time. Have a great day, guys. Bye.